Good evening and welcome to this edition of Inside Edition. I'm your host, David Bowman, and welcome. Well, it's the autumn of 2016 and we're in the midst of a hot political season nationally, on a state level, and even here locally in Calaveras County. So we thought it only appropriate to have as our guest this evening somebody who's right in the thick of Calaveras County politics, Gary Tofanelli. He's currently a candidate for supervisor in District 1 and actually served as the district supervisor from about 2009 to 2013?
2012.
Great.
9 to 12.
So welcome, Gary Tofanelli. Great to see you.
Hi, Dave. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
So I live on the other side of the county, and I'm not in District 1, which is the district where you've been a supervisor in the past and are currently running again. So maybe there's some other newcomers and maybe from the other side of the county that aren't familiar with your background. So maybe just give us a few moments of your background, maybe where you grew up and when you arrived in Calaveras County.
Well, I was born and raised in Jackson. My grandfather was chief of police there, and came to Calaveras County in 1991. Still live in the same house in Burson, California. I have two kids. One son is Gary Jr. He lives in Hawaii. He's been there since 1993. My other son, John, lives here. He lives in Rancho Calaveras. He works for me, and he graduated from Calaveras High School. Have three grandkids that live here, and I own my own business. I'm a steel fabricator and erector. I've been a steel fabricator and erector for 44 years, and just enjoy living here in Calaveras County. I would not love to live anywhere else. Even though I was from Amador, Calaveras is where my heart is.
Right. Well, it's a great county, isn't it?
It is.
So you were the supervisor for District 1 from 2009 to 2012.
I was.
And you must be a glutton for punishment because you're coming back potentially for a second round as supervisor. So tell us a little bit about what your experiences were and what your fond memories were of the time you served. And by goodness, why would you come back for more of it?
Well, the fond memories were few and far in between during the period of time that I was in office. It was the Great Recession, where things were contracting very quickly. The state finances were in turmoil as well as the nation's. People were losing jobs. Industry was declining. And so was the revenue coming into the county. It did not recover anywhere near it was prior to prior years before I left office in 2012. We were doing what we needed to do to make sure we had a balanced budget, and we did not. We made sure we had healthy reserves, and one-time funding was only used very sparsely for certain things, usually capital improvement projects. And so the times were very, very difficult as far as being able to spend money and being able to do some things that would benefit Calaveras County along the lines of economics and bringing industry into this county. Things were just contracting. There was no expansion. There was no. I was in business myself. A lot of in construction business with the steel fabrication, and we do commercial and industrial properties. Basically, is what we do.
And that really ground down.
It ground down to where basically most of the jobs that were available to bid on were government jobs. It was very difficult you had a bunch of people bidding on those jobs, and the prices were going very down. They got a lot of good deals back then during that time.
Right.
But
in essence, it wasn't easy to be a supervisor to oversee this degradation of the finances. Did you feel like people were blaming you guys as supervisors,
No.
or did they have a sense that it was macro trends that were affecting us that we couldn't do anything about?
Well, first I got to say, no matter what kind of times it is, it's very difficult to be a supervisor. You can't please everybody all of the time. And you take criticism for decisions that you make. So I think in retrospect, a lot of things that needed to be done on my part was to be more vocal and talk more about why the decisions were being made, why I was voting something a certain way. Although some votes you have a lot more information that you can't divulge because some of it was given to you in a closed session to which you cannot report out.
Legal confidences.
Yeah, legal confidences. And so, but I think basically being more vocal in giving more statements on the reasons why you're going the way you're going, so people at least have the knowledge or understand or have the information why this is happening. I think that's very important to make sure the constituents out there understand.
So are you saying that you might have done it differently? I mean, you
Well,
ran for re-election in 12 and didn't win. Do you think some of that misunderstanding of communication contributed to that, or?
Well, it very possibly could. There's a lot of misinformation out there at the time on a couple of projects that were happening, a couple of things that were happening, that the information, more information could have been out there for people to understand and know. But once again, you can't please everybody all of the time, so it is a very difficult job. It's not something that you are in private industry and you are the owner or the boss and you just tell people how it is and they may grumble and go off, but they end up doing it, you know.
Right. Not so in politics.
Yeah, not so in politics, correct. So.
Right. But you're willing to serve again, you're running again, so tell us a little bit about how you'd view the opportunity, if you were given that opportunity, how you would view it similarly or differently than the last chance.
Well, again, going back to what I was just saying about making sure that I have given people the information. A lot of times when items come before you at the board, there's a discussion period at the board level, and I think what needs to be done on a lot of, especially important issues, people understand what's going through your mind, what information you have that you're basing your decision on, and why you're basing your decision on that. So they at least have the information, and hopefully it gets out to them via the newspapers or via the camera, because they're all taped and you can see them on public TV, although all of us in the county do not get public TV. And a lot of times they're viewed, there's other places you can view them that are, especially on the internet.
Yeah, YouTube channel.
Yeah, YouTube and a couple other places broadcast it. So that information is out there, and you need to relay that to people so they know exactly what's going on, why you're doing what you're doing. I think that's very, very important. I see that happening currently, and I see that happening back when I was on the board. People ask. A lot of times you meet with people and they ask the question, why did you vote that way? And you think back and you think, well, I thought I was very clear, but apparently I wasn't very clear. And maybe the information in the newspaper wasn't exactly clear on what your feelings were or what your information or knowledge was of an issue that came before the board. And so that is something that I think is very important.
Clarity and transparency.
Clarity and transparency.
But still respecting the bounds legally of legality and protecting confidences.
Correct.
From a legal point of view. In getting ready for tonight's discussion with you, chat with you, it struck me when I realized I looked at all 5 districts of the county, and District 1, of course, down in the San Andreas and downtown Valley Springs area, that's your district. Yours is the only contested election this year. You and Mr. Edson, who's the current supervisor in that district, are in a runoff for November 8th. Correct. But in District 2, Chris Wright has chosen not to rerun, and we know that Jack Garamendi is actually going to already take his spot. District 4, Debbie Ponte isn't running, and Dennis Mills, I guess, in June, got enough votes. And District 5, Mr. Kearney is subject. We don't know what will happen on a recall. But it's actually possible that 4 of the 5 supervisors might be new as of January. Is that
it
unusual? Is that, and of course Michael Oliveira, who's in my district, District 3, has been in office for a couple of years. So is that unusual, or that seems a little daunting to have a lot of new folks in there? What would be the opportunities and challenges?
Well, I think the last election, there were 3 new ones. So, is it unusual? It very well could be. I really don't know. It just depends on what the atmosphere of the electorate is when the time comes in November, and the atmosphere of the politics as to whether incumbents are replaced or not.
Right.
So,
so several were new 4 years ago, or even 2 years ago in my district.
2 years ago, when I won in 2009, I was the only new incoming supervisor. There was 2 other races, Mr. Walensky and Mr. Tryon, and they both won as incumbents. So I was the junior coming in.
Right.
So.
Were you to come back in, you'd be one of the seniors, wouldn't you, with some previous experience?
With previous experience, yes, absolutely.
Again, in getting prepared a little bit for our visit today, I had a chance to just climb on the internet like we all do, and I came across a fun interview you had with John Hamilton on the Pine Tree. I think it was in about May of 2012. And he was asked, it was the end of your term, well before the upcoming election. But I found it fascinating and actually quite, not disturbing, but amazing that some of the issues, some of the issues that were important at that time, and they still are, budgetary, state finances, they were not sending the county the money, sort of borrowing it by saying they'd pay it, in the future. The new jail, it was just coming online, and there were concerns about being able to budget in the probation department and whatnot. And I thought, wow, the big issues that seem to face us now, butte fire recovery, cannabis cultivation. We've had a 4-year drought that's led to some tremendous tree mortality. Even healthcare, the effects on our local community and local hospital with the Affordable Care Act. I thought none of these were on the radar screen 4 years ago. So if some of those issues like the butte fire or cannabis cultivation, are any of those, as you're anticipating the possibility of serving again, would they seem to be a priority? What would be, the thing that rises to the top of the biggest issue? Well,
I think they're all priority. They're all heavy issues in the county. But, before I answer that and get into that, you touched on the subject, and I think education and people understanding is key. You touched a little bit on back when I was supervisor and leaving office in 2012, about the state withholding funding. The situation with the funding in the county and all counties in Calaveras, California, is that when you pay sales tax or you pay property tax, you may write your check out to Calaveras County and the tax collector's office. That money goes all the way to the state, all of it. We don't hold back a certain percent of it. That goes to the state, and then and the sales tax goes to the Board of Equalization. They, in return, then give back to us at certain intervals during the year. December and June usually is when most payments come in. So you're on your own till you receive those payments. During the time that I was in office, there's no obligation by the state if they mandate that we're supposed to get a little over 12% of property tax, or 17% of property taxes back to us. The state keeps the rest of it. If they say they're only going to give us 10% in withhold money, which you talked about a little bit, touched on. We have to make do with 10% until they give back money to us, and there's no time frame for them to give us back money that they've taken. They can withhold it. Do they
have to pay it eventually at some point?
We're a subsidiary of the state. We are not an entity of ourselves. We are a subsidiary of the state, so we are part of the whole of the state. They will give it to us. They did give it to us. But if they need it and they see an emergency that they need withhold funds for any reasons, they have the right to do so. And I think that's very important for people to understand when it comes to a lot of other things when it has to do with funds. A lot of times you get funds in. There was an issue that was very prevalent when I was running at that time about people complaining that we didn't have any money, but we were spending $170,000 to replace locks, going to electronic locks. Well, that money was given to the county by the state, and the money could only be used for those locks.
No,
if you couldn't, a very specific use. You couldn't say we need another sheriff's officer. We're going to fund it for that. They would withhold that $170,000 and never give it to you. So you either used it to replace the locks, or you lost it. You didn't have it.
Use it or lose it.
You use it or lose it.
For that specific
And that happens
purpose.
quite a bit. So people don't understand the funding issues on funding and why specific money is being used in different areas. And you're thinking, well, you keep hearing we have a deficit, we have a deficit, we have a deficit. We have a deficit in the general fund. And the general fund is actually the only part of the budget that the Board of Supervisors have control over. Any other funds that are being used to run the county, we don't have control over. Those are state earmarked funds. Or federal, exactly, or federals, or grants, or what have you, and those specific monies are only to be used for those specific things that they're earmarked for.
Right.
You cannot use them for anything else. So, and I just wanted to touch base on that.
That's good. That's clarifying, because I didn't necessarily know that, the magnitude of that. But that's got to be a challenge if you're trying to construct a budget for a county in anticipation of coming years, not knowing if the state's going to potentially withhold, 7%, 5% of that?
At one time,
funding?
they withheld 7% of the money, and
That's
it was a huge, yes, it's huge. That's why you have reserves. That's why you have money in teeter fund in case something like that, or even such as the Butte fire, a disaster relief comes in. Sure, the state has said they're going to pay us and they will help in recovery, but there's no time frame on when that money is going to come, and you still have to operate and you still have to take care of business in that recovery portion of it.
Right.
And so that's why you need to have those funds available for you to use. Also, sometimes the auditor controller, when paying bills, if we have not received, it's getting close to December, funds may be in a general account, be running low, she can go to reserves and use the money to pay the bills to keep the county operating, and then replace it when the state comes through with the money. That happens a lot of the people don't really know.
Do you watch waitfully at the post office box, wondering when the check's going to come?
Yeah. Well, it's all electronic, so it's not. It's not the checks in the mail.
Yeah.
It used to come Pony
Electronically
Express.
checks in the mail.
Check
right.
the Pony Express guy.
Okay, so with that general sort of understanding that finances and county budgets are always going to be oftentimes a foundational issue. Some of these other issues that I mentioned, cannabis cultivation, Butte fire recovery, maybe the drought, with the tree mortality and whatnot. Is there one that you think is really driving the conversation in the county, or one that's particularly important to you as you're considering being elected again?
Well, everything is conversation. I had a little meet and greet last night where quite a few people came, and the general conversation is cannabis.
Oh, so
that's what's on everybody's mind. That's what everybody's talking about. Cannabis cultivation in Calaveras County, and there's a lot of things being said and a lot of people saying different things, but I think it's very important, again, to people understand what's driving this, what's going on with it. In 2015, Assembly Bill 266, or AB 266, came into effect. And AB 266, and they're calling it born MRSA, which is Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, which comes into effect in 2018. And it's very important to understand what that says. What basically it says is, one, that the counties or cities have a right to set their own regulations for its dispensary and growth and dispensing of it and transportation of it. Or they can outright ban it. They don't want it in the county or their city. If they don't do that when it comes into effect in 2018, that they will be subject to what the state does and says.
So even though we are a subsidiary as a county, the state won't supersede or override. Each county has its chance to either say we're going to regulate this, or we're going to allow it under regulation, or ban it.
Correct. Yes. So what are the nuts and bolts of AB 266? Well, the state, going back to 1996 when medical marijuana became legal, and you got a card, and a caregiver can grow plants, or if you have a card, you can grow your own personal plants. Because of dispensaries opening up, the realization that grows were happening to supply those dispensaries, the state decided that they needed to regulate that, much like you regulate medicine. And so AB 266 says that if you grow it, that starting in January of 2018, you will need to have a permit from a county that has set regulations, and you will need to get a permit from the state to grow it. You cannot get a permit from the state without having a permit from the county. So you need those two permits.
It starts with the county permit, and then you go.
Correct. But it doesn't stop there. Much like the urgency ordinance that's passed, the difference now is that you cannot transport it. If you grow it, you cannot transport it yourself. MRSA says, and AB 266 says, that you need a permit from the county, and you have to have a permit from the state to load it in a vehicle and transport it anywhere.
And that's a separate permit from growing it?
That's a separate permit. And if you grow it, you cannot transport it.
No vertical integration.
No, they want complete separation. Complete separation. A grower grows it, a person transports it. And where do you transport it to? AB 266 says you transport it to a laboratory, and it must be a state-permitted laboratory. The laboratory is to analyze it, what you send to it, and they want to know the toxin levels. They want to know what people are putting in their body, and they want to know how potent it is. And they will grade it on its potency, and they will either pass it or reject it for sale on how much toxin levels are in it. If somebody sprayed it, rat poisoning got to it in the roots or whatever, they want to know what people are actually putting in their body. Is it medicine or is it poison? Once it's graded and okayed and stamped okay from the laboratory, then the transporter, the person with the permit to transport it, will transport it to a dispensary. The dispensary must have a permit from the county and a permit from the state, and they cannot transport it. So they are separate by themselves too. They can only distribute it, they can sell it. That's their sole purpose in it.
Can somebody have a permit to grow and dispense and not be?
Each
one is.
Each one is separate. You cannot do any of the other ones.
Wow, it's quite bifurcated.
So
right?
Yes, it is.
Right.
That's what the nuts and bolts of AB 266 is.
How does that?
There are sizes of grows in it, and the urgency ordinance is a little bit restrictor here in Calaveras County than what actually MRSA rules are. I think MRSA rules are for outdoor grows 2 or 3 times the size of what's allowed here, half acre, the most here, and Indoors, I think theirs is a tremendous amount, a couple 100,000 square feet grows.
Right.
So.
Believe it or not, we just don't have a lot of time. We maybe have about 4 minutes left. I can't believe as a
already?
new host how quickly this time goes. But quickly for you, we've got, of course, Prop 64, which is a statewide legalization of recreational use. Measure D, which I think would potentially supersede if passed the urgency ordinance.
It would.
And then a Measure C, which has to do with taxation. Could you weigh in briefly on those as you'd like to, on the advisability of either of those, Measure D and Measure C, particularly here in the county?
Well, the Measure C is the taxation of it, and the taxation that's on the ballot right now is driven by the canopy size or the indoor size of the grow. And a half acre, which is the largest that's allowed under the emergency ordinance, is 22,000 square feet. So it would be $2 for the 22,000 square feet of growth on a canopy, and which would be a $44,000 tax for that. And these are on commercial grows.
Right, and that's different from the fees that are generated from
That's different
from the registration.
Yes, that is different from the fees of the $5,000 for the permit that is under the emergency order. Now, those fees may go up or they may go down, depending on, we get a handle on, the county gets a handle on exactly how many departments, and I think it's a wide range of departments that are affected by it, and the costs associated with what's happening with the grows. But, the other issue on the thing is with the urgency ordinance and with the ordinance Measure D is it is taken out of law enforcement and is put in, is categorized as a civil in code violations, because it is now a code. It's not a criminal, it's a code. And code violations, which, they just had a big bust of 44,000 plants, 4,700 plants or whatever it was. It was huge. I know we're running out of time here. They eradicated it. They used the money from the $5,000 permit fees to go in and eradicate that. But now the big problem is, because it's code enforcement, now they have to go back and remove all the grow containers and abate all of that.
Oh, the pollution, in other words.
And pollution and everything. Now that goes back on the property owner. Much like a code violation where you have a bunch of junk cars on your property and you keep getting notices, and finally the code compliance comes out and takes all the cars away, and you end up with a bill. Either you pay it, if you don't pay it, what it costs to get rid of it, then you have a lien against your property.
Oh, wow.
So that's both of those measures, the urgency ordinance and Measure D, have brought it into the realm of code violations.
Right, versus
instead of criminal.
Right.
But it is still criminal right now without the permits to transport it. So that is against the law. If you get pulled over with 50 pounds of marijuana, or cannabis in your car, that's still a criminal act.
Right.
So.
Wow. Gary Tofanelli, a pleasure. I have an admission that this is my first time as host of Inside View, so thanks for my first time being enlightening and entertaining, and we wish you good luck in your election in November. And thanks again for joining us on Inside View. I'm David Bowman, and we'll see you next time.